Yo, what's going on, friends? Today's video is going to be on the revamped Legacy of Nightmares Walker build for patch 2.4.1. Now, right off the bat, keep in mind that this is a Legacy of Nightmares build, and that reads, while this is your only item set bonus, every ancient item you have equipped increases your damage dealt by 100% and reduces your damage taken by 4%. So this build has a relatively high gear requirement, but I can tell you from personal experience that in Season 5, I was able to run this build on day 3 of the season, so it's really not that hard to gear for. But there are other T10 builds that will be much easier to gear for, but this is one of the strongest once you have the gear for it. The basic rundown of the gameplay is very simple. You have Locust Swarm and Firewalkers to kill the trash, and you want to get to a damage threshold where they are both in combination able to kill all the trash themselves. And then you have 3 Gargantuans with the short man's finger, and then also fire zombie dogs to take care of the elites, champions, and bosses. The majority of your movement speed comes from the Spirit Walk Severance and Ingeom combination. So you're also going to run things like Nemesis Bracers to make sure you can keep that Ingeom buff up as much as possible. In my current gear, I'm able to do level 50 greater rifts in 2 minutes or less very consistently, and the majority of Torment 10 rifts in always under 3 minutes, most clears being around 2 minutes or so. Now, if you had about 2k Paragon and you actually augmented all of your gear, you could probably do level 60 G rifts for gem upgrades, the lower level gem upgrades, in 2 minutes to 3 minutes, which is really pretty quick. Let's talk about the abilities. So, Locust Swarm Searing Locusts. This is just the highest damage Locust Swarm available, and we're already getting the Pestilence rune from the Vile Hive Mojo, so there's no reason not to run this. Again, this is going to be your main source of trash clearing. We've got Summon Zombie Dogs, Burning Dogs. We're going to run the Short Man's Finger for the 3 smaller Gargantuans, so we're not going to have a big zombie dog, but even still, with the Legacy of Nightmares buff, these zombie dogs will hit like a truck, and they also give you some nice AoE clear with the Fire Aura. Soul Harvest Soul to Waste, you get 5% movement speed per stack, as well as 3% intelligence per stack. Spirit Walk Severance, so this is going to give you an extra 100% movement speed while in Spirit Walk, and ideally you're going to want to have a 10-second Ingeom, that way this comes right back off a cooldown while you have your Ingeom proc. This is where the majority of your movement speed comes from. Horrify Stalker, this is really there again for the movement speed. It increases your movement speed by 20% for 4 seconds after casting it. And again, with the Ingeom proc, you can just spam it pretty much. Gargantuans, Humongoid, these are going to be your main boss, elite, and champion killers. They're just going to hit like an absolute truck. And the Humongoid allows them to cleave and do some AoE damage. The first passive is Gruesome Feast. When you're healed by a health globe, you gain 10% of your maximum mana and 10% intelligence for 15 seconds. In a build like this, where you're just blasting through rifts, clearing them really quickly, it's pretty easy to keep 5 stacks of Gruesome Feast up, which is a gigantic damage bonus. Grave Injustice. This is mostly there for the cooldown reduction on kill. The main reason for this really is when you have champion or elite droughts and you may not have that Ingeom proc, this allows you to get your Spirit Walk back off of cooldown and then to continue to move quickly through the rift, because that does happen from time to time. Most rifts it won't be an issue, but sometimes it is, and I think having Grave Injustice is really mandatory, honestly, for those times. And it also gives you life and mana back. We've got Fierce Loyalty for more movement speed while we have pets out. And then Confidence Ritual for 25% additional damage to enemies within 20 yards. And then the 5th passive on the Hellfire Amulet is going to be Pierce the Veil for an additional 20% more damage. Next up, let's talk about the key pieces of gear for the build. So for the weapon, the Ingeom, again, whenever we kill an elite or champion, we'll reduce our cooldowns by up to 10 seconds depending on how well of a roll you have on the Ingeom. You can still run it with an 8 or 9 second one, but 10 seconds definitely helps speed the runs up. For boots, we have the Firewalkers. You burn the ground you walk on, dealing 300 to 400% weapon damage each second. Now this gets buffed by the Legacy of Nightmares damage multiplier, meaning that as you're running through the mobs, that paired with the Locust Swarm allows you to kill the trash, just those 2 things alone. They aren't necessarily mandatory to the build, but they definitely speed runs up. We've got the Vile Hive Mojo. Locust Swarm gains the effect of the Pestilence rune and deals up to 60% increased damage. So you get the Pestilence rune allowing your Locust Swarm to jump quicker and a nice damage multiplier for it as well. This allows us to run the Searing Locust on our bar. That way we get the highest damage potential out of Locust Swarm possible. Then again, we have the two Legacy of Nightmares rings, the Litany of the Undaunted, and the Wailing Host. For the pants, Hexing Pants of Mr. Yan. Your resource generation and damage is increased by 25% while moving and decreased by 20 to 25% while standing still. So you get a really gigantic damage increase while moving, but then a huge decrease when standing still. So in this build, you want to be constantly moving no matter what you're doing. The only time you want to stop is if you're possibly wearing a Harrington Waistguard to click a chest or a dead body or something, or to pick up gear. Otherwise, always be moving. For the belt, we've got the Witching Hour. This just gives 7% attack speed and 50% crit damage. Locust Swarm scales off of crit chance and crit damage, so it buffs it. And also, pets get damage from attack speed as a Witch Doctor. Other options would be the Harrington Waistguard and the Hodge Wrap. Now, if you run the Hodge Wrap, I would recommend running Bane of the Trapped as a legendary gem, because everything that Locust Swarm ticks on will then get the extra damage from the Bane of the Trapped from the slow of the Hodge Wrap. For gloves, we have Tasker and Theos. Increases the attack speed of your pets by 50%. I think these are the best gloves in my opinion. You want your pets to be dealing their damage as quickly as possible, but you could also run Mage Fists here for more fire damage. The Aquila Cuirass for the chest piece. While above 90% primary resource, all damage taken is reduced by 50%. This is where the majority of your damage reduction comes from in the build. Your other option here would be to go with damage with a Cinder Coat for more fire damage. For the bracers, Nemesis bracers are mandatory. This gives you more champions. Whenever you click a shrine in a pylon, another champion will spawn, meaning that you have more chances to proc your Engiom and keep that buff going. Best in slot for the necklace is the Hellfire Amulet, giving you a 5th passive, very strong. The helmet's going to be the Quetzalcoatl. What this effectively does is it doubles the damage of your Locust Swarm. And then since we can't fit an Avarice Band or Thing of the Deep into this build, the best shoulders are going to be the Corruption shoulders. These are craftable, and they always roll with 7 pickup radius. I would recommend trying to get anywhere from 12 to 15 pickup radius total for the build. Since all my gear isn't properly rolled, I'd recommend that you click the Diablo fans link to the written guide in the info section of this video for exact stat priorities. Next up we have the Kanai's Cube. For the weapon, it's going to be the Wormwood. This will passively cast your Locust Swarm for you, allowing you to continue to run and not have to cast it. In the armor slot, it's going to be the Mask of Jerem, 100% increased damage to your pets. Now this and Quetzalcoatl are interchangeable. You can wear one or the other. Say you only have an ancient of one of them, then you can put that on your character and then cube the other. But ideally, you're going to wear the Quetz and cube the mask. Then we have the Short Man's Finger in the jewelry slot for the 3 smaller, more powerful gargantuans. For legendary gems, Bane of the Powerful is going to be the first. This has been revamped, so you still get 20% increased damage for 30 seconds after killing an elite pack. But you also gain 15% increased damage versus elites and take 15% reduced damage from elites. Now that second part, the reduction from elites, in softcore probably not going to be that big of a deal, but the more damage reduction in hardcore, the better. And then the next one's going to be Zay's Stone of Vengeance. Damage you deal is increased by a percentage for every 10 yards between you and the enemy hit, and then it goes up to a maximum percentage increase at 50 yards. Now this is really good because your Locust Swarm is spreading all over the map, really far away from you. So the farther away that it spreads, the more damage from Zay's Stone you're going to get. And it's also giving you more damage. It was buffed a little bit in this patch. The third gem is Gem of Efficacious Toxin. You poison enemies and deal damage to them over 10 seconds. Now that damage from the Efficacious Toxin actually gets buffed by the Legacy of Nightmares damage multiplier. On top of that, all enemies you poison take 10% increased damage from all sources and deal 10% less damage. So again, a nice gem for hardcore, the enemy is dealing less damage. Potentially if you're playing hardcore, you may want to run a gold wrap anyways, just so you're almost immortal, but getting a little bit extra damage reduction from things is always good. For Paragon points and core, get as much movement speed as you need and then go intelligence. In offense, you want crit chance and crit damage first because your Locust Swarm scales off of crit chance and crit damage, and then it also buffs your pets as well. then cooldown reduction, and then attack speed. You could probably go attack speed first if you really wanted to. Attack speed, again, does buff the damage of your pets. For defense, armor percentage, life percentage, all resist, and then life regen. And then for utility, area damage, and then life on hit and gold find are, whatever, kind of interchangeable, and you really don't need resource cost reduction in this build. If you're running Torment 10, obviously the gold find is more important. So anyways, guys, that'll about wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it helps some of you guys come Season 6 and in patch 2.4.1. Again, just keep in mind, this build has a decently high gear threshold. You do have to have very good gear to make it work, but once you have the gear for it, it is extremely fast and very easy and fun to play. So again, thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.